When Enrico Fermi asked, "Where are they?" he wasn't actually asking about radio signals or other long-range messages. He was asking why, if the universe is as old as we think it is, and the evolution of intelligent and technological life is inevitable, we haven't been visited yet. This is a very good question, because for some people it should have happened by now, but it seemingly hasn't in any obvious sense. We can follow this with two more questions. If we were visited by an extraterrestrial civilization, would we even be able to recognize any signs of this? And are there already credible signs that Earth has been visited by an extraterrestrial civilization? Quite a few people have answered yes to both these questions, and this topic is a dream for conspiracy theorists, because it often involves complex subjects that simply cannot be understood without some specialized knowledge and research. And because these specialized areas are often the very ones accused of being part of the conspiracy, this often results in conspiracy speculations, feeding off and reinforcing each other, helped by a heavy dose of media frenzy. But here we'll be looking at 5 occurrences that are often attributed to extraterrestrial visitation that probably have a completely different explanation. Now, this video is not trying to debunk the alien visitation claim linked to these subjects. We are just giving you an alternative view on what might have caused them, so you can make up your own minds. As we've said before, one of the best ways to the truth is by debunking. So, sit back and enjoy. Livestock mutilations. We've all heard the stories and seen the gruesome pictures. There is a regularity to these reports: eyes removed, lips and other tissue around the mouth removed, seemingly near circular holes cut into the anal and genital regions, tongues missing, no blood. In general, only selected portions of the carcass have been removed, and the near circular wounds appear to have been caused with precision instruments of some sort. This appears to be a selective, deliberate pattern over and over again, and that fact is very true. It's worth noting that this pattern of mutilation also occurs in the stages of permimortem and the early postmortem in animals in places like Africa that have been killed by predators, disease, drought, and starvation. This is generally because large animals like cattle, horses, zebra, wildebeest, and of course elephants all have fairly thick hide, but some areas are softer and thinner, or aren't covered by any hide at all, and these are the areas that predators and scavengers target first. These include the eyes, mouth, tongue, anus, and genital area. Predators and scavengers also target the internal organs first because they are more tender, and only afterwards consume the muscle meat. Open wounds in the genital areas will also tend to widen and become roughly circular depending upon temperature, humidity, and larval insect activity, meaning that the hide will shrink and the edges will be smoothed. Scavenging birds like buzzards and vultures also typically cause round, smooth edge wounds, and nearly always begin with the eyes and the anus. And of course, any blood will quickly disappear into the soil and decompose, and the remaining blood in the muscles will coagulate and solidify. There are actually human body farms in places like the University of Tennessee, at Knoxville, Western Carolina University, Colorado Mesa University, and the University of South Florida, which are used to establish databases for forensic investigations. In these farms, human corpses are left exposed to the elements and scavengers, or enclosed in cages so that only environmental factors can affect them. They are under 24-hour surveillance, and the patterns are essentially the same as in livestock mutilations, because we are of course animals as well, and these processes are natural. So essentially, despite the hype, there are no features of livestock mutilations that do not occur in cases of normal predation, scavenging, drought, disease, and exposure to the elements. The areas initially affected are indeed selective and non-random, but this is because they are the softest and easiest places for predators and scavengers to target. Many ranchers presumably would or should recognize this, and in fact many do, but for many they do not, and these are the stories that tend to become news. Now of course, we cannot say that no animal or human mutilations in the past have not been caused by anything unexplained. But as a general rule, cattle mutilations should not be used as conclusive evidence of alien visitation. Mysterious or out-of-place artifacts. These are objects or occasionally depictions of apparent objects that are either inexplicable or seemingly more advanced than their apparent context can explain. As a result, they are sometimes cited as evidence of visitations by highly advanced extraterrestrial civilizations. It is unknown how many of these objects there are, or how many have been investigated in any serious or systematic manner, but some of them have become well known within the UFO and alien visitation communities. Any genuinely out-of-place artifact would be of intense interest, but the vast majority of these seem to be examples or representations of 20th century technologies discovered in some appropriately ancient context, rather than truly advanced and therefore extraterrestrial technology. Among these are the Iud wedge, an aluminium wedge found in Romania in association with 11,000-year-old mastodon bones, and which ended up in a storeroom either in the Museum of History or the Archaeological Institute of Transylvania, depending upon your source. It was somehow found 20 years later by some people from a Romanian UFO magazine who claimed that an unnamed engineer had identified it as a piece of a vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. It actually turned out to be a tooth from a piece of earth-moving machinery used at the construction site where the wedge was found. It was mixed with the bones purely by chance, by the action of the machinery. Another, the Costa artifact, appeared to be a spark flung, found in a 500,000-year-old geode. Indeed, it proved to be a Champion brand spark plug from the 1920s, encased not in a geode, but rather in an iron oxide concretion. However, despite those two being scientifically debunked, there are others that are particularly compelling and puzzling that are still technically unexplained. For example, the bygone pipes located in Tibet near the town of Dalinga. Just outside the town there is a cave, or in some accounts 3 caves, which contain iron pipes that are remnants of a construction project 150,000 years ago. Accounts of these pipes are exceedingly tangled, with little information and no scholarly publications. Even finding a dependable image of them is difficult, and the most reliable evidence we have comes from the Chinese, who in the early 2000s indicated that these pipes are full of organic plant matter, and sections show tree rings, things that are actually very common in the fossil record. Despite these findings, many still believe they are of extraterrestrial origin, and the bygone pipes are currently the main tourist attraction for the area. The Betz Mystery Sphere. This was found in 1974 by the Betz family on their Florida property in the Fort George Islands near Jacksonville. It was about the size of a bowling ball, about 21 pounds and about 8 inches in diameter. After the discovery and a tip-off from Jerry Betz, the story was reported in the Chronicle and rapidly became rather a tangled mess, involving a fair number of people, including J. Allen Hynek of Project Blue Book fame, the US Navy and Marine Corps, along with various researchers, and a Taos, New Mexico sculptor named James Sterling Jones. And over time, a variety of claims were made about the sphere. These include that it would spontaneously roll from shade to sunlight. It contained a heavy element unknown to the science at the time. It emitted a radio signal detected by the Navy. It fell off of a truck being driven by the sculptor James Sterling Jones as he was passing by, and J. Allen Hynek examined it. These are just a few of the many outlandish claims and counterclaims made about the sphere. However, the one that seems most likely is that it was a hoax intended to collect a $50,000 reward from the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, the membership of which included Hynek, and was scheduled to meet in New Orleans just 2 months after the discovery of the sphere. In a twist to the story, the mysterious object seemed to have vanished, apparently taking the entire Betz family with it, along with a neighbour who claimed to have an identical sphere. So for now, although the Belt sphere remains a mystery, it does seem a bit suspect. But because of its disappearance, any connection to extraterrestrial life cannot be proved or disproved. The Kimbaya Airplanes. These come from Colombia and are dated to around AD 1000. They're very small, about 2 to 3 inches in length, and made of gold, and it's claimed they were made by ancient astronauts, aka aliens. Some do in fact look like delta-winged jets, although they also look like birds, moths, and other flying animals, presumably because airplane design is based on animals that have evolved flight over hundreds of millions of years. Depending on how you view them, they can also look like shamanic objects. A persistent claim is that 2 German aeronautical engineers, Peter Belting and Konrad Lubbers, created radio-controlled models of these objects, with only slight modifications, and these models proved to be aerodynamically stable. However, how one defines slight modification is a relevant point, because that can make a big difference when it comes to the requirements of flight. The models that Belting and Lubbers made do look quite a bit like the Kimbaya objects, but they have also been clearly modified, presumably over a number of trials, so that they are in fact aerodynamically stable. Now, the idea that extraterrestrials would travel hundreds or thousands of light years through space, and then build 20th century jet aircraft after they got here, does seem hard to explain, or does it? The Antikythera Mechanism. It's a computer, if that term refers to any device that calculates or computes, and a marvellous instrument. Part of it was salvaged between 1900 and 1901 from the 2,000-year-old Antikythera shipwreck. It was studied for a time, but the degree of corrosion made this extremely difficult, and it didn't attract much serious attention until 2006, when it was subject to a CT study. Inscriptions in the device suggest that it was manufactured somewhere in Corinth or in one of its colonies, because these inscriptions appear to be in the Corinthian dialect of ancient Greek. There are obviously missing parts, but it appears to have been a hand-cranked device for displaying the relative positions of celestial objects, such as planets, the sun, and the moon. It was an extremely sophisticated device for its time, but despite the link to ancient aliens, there is really nothing enigmatic about it. Ancient Greek natural philosophers, mathematicians, and craftsmen were quite sophisticated and easily capable of understanding, designing, and constructing such a machine. In addition, there are a few references in classical literature to other similar devices, and so, like the Egyptian pyramids, the various henges in Britain, and the Baghdad battery, the Antikythera device was likely the project of a fairly long history of experimentation and had several prototypes. What do you think? Now, we're adding a bonus topic in here because we cannot talk about a topic like this without mentioning the pyramids. Humans have been building or attempting to build huge structures for thousands of years. The urge was perhaps to construct things bigger, greater, and more enduring than themselves, much like modern architects today. These works were so important to these people at the time that they devoted decades and even lives to their construction. And for all of our undeniable advancements in technology and knowledge, we've forgotten things, and so we no longer thoroughly understand how some of the building projects were accomplished. And there is a persistent claim that the Old and Middle Kingdom Egyptians were incapable of building the pyramids themselves because their technology was too primitive and they didn't know enough. But if you think about, despite us now thinking we are an advanced society, very few of us would know how to even make the stone tools used to build these huge structures, let alone construct them. There are about 80 known pyramids from well before the beginning of the Old Kingdom to the end of the Middle Kingdom, nearly 1,000-year span. Many of them were small, some reflect errors that were made in floor plans or calculations during the transition from mastabas to classic pyramids like the Great Pyramid of Khufu, or were otherwise just not constructed very well. The most famous are the 3 large pyramids at the Giza complex, and these are marvels by any standards. There are still many things we do not know in detail about how these large pyramids were constructed. We do know that they were constructed according to very precise plans, since the Egyptians learned from their failed collapsed pyramid and bent pyramid that poor planning could lead to disaster, and the precise layout of the 3 pyramids at Giza illustrate the Egyptian obsession with geometry, since they used geometry every day to plan fields and other projects. They also paid very close attention to astronomy, since precise timing of seasons was crucial to planning for annual Nile flooding. It's believed ramps were used to drag the stone blocks, some weighing as much as 80 tons to the building site, and then up each level of the pyramids as it was constructed. Some of the ramps for dragging the blocks have been found, although there is still considerable controversy over what kind of ramps were used at the site for actually placing the blocks. The recent discovered remains of a canal indicate that barges carrying the stone blocks were able to sail near the site of construction. Modern experiments using tools of the era, such as copper chisels and wooden wedges, show that these tools were in fact capable of cutting the stone used. If the stone was split along the natural planes of the rock bedding, and sand was used as an abrasive, even the granite can be cut this way, using wooden wedges saturated with water. It would have been incredibly labour intensive, but this would not have been unusual. It is not true, however, that all the casing stones in the pyramids fit together exactly, at times with errors of less than a millimetre. Some blocks do in fact fit quite closely, but the vast majority are fairly rough, with gaps between stone faces filled in with gypsum and salt mortar. This allowed for the inevitable flexing and shifting of stones, and dry stone construction from Peru was at least as impressive, if not more so. Estimates of worker numbers vary widely, as do total time for construction. It's generally accepted that workers numbered around 20,000 to 22,000, and total time of construction was about 10 to 15 years. Only about 4,000 skilled stonemasons actually worked on the stone blocks, with the other workers being essentially support staff. With seasonal month-long flooding being a fact of life in the Nile Valley, there would have been plenty of labour available, and these people apparently donated their labour in lieu of taxes on farm yields, and also received a daily allotment of bread and beer. There is also evidence of the use of slave labour. It seems the ancient Egyptians, with many hundreds of years of experience in working with stone, were perfectly capable of constructing these monumental edifices, particularly when the incentive was released from tax responsibilities during long periods when those taxes could not have been easily paid. So in effect, despite the theories, it would appear that no extraterrestrial intervention was needed. Now, all these subjects we've mentioned are fascinating, but offer no hard evidence of alien involvement, much as we would like them to. But that's not to say we haven't been visited by extraterrestrial life, because we very much believe we have, and still are being. However, we believe the truth lies somewhere else, and research should be concentrated on UFOs. As we believe the various governments around the world know something, but seem intent on covering it up, and everything still very much points to the fact that we are not alone. What do you think?